Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor and today we are talking about used cars, a subject that doesn't really seem to have gone away in 2020, understandably. And joining me is Head of Valuations at CAP HPI, Darren Martin. Hello, Darren.
Hi, James.
Lovely to have you on, as always. We've been speaking to you a lot this year, understandably, but it's always good to chat to you. So, broad question, really. What's CAP HPI seeing at the moment?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It's a very interesting time. It's been obviously a very interesting year for used car values. We've probably never been so popular to discuss those sorts of things because there's definitely no normality this year. What we're seeing, so we have a live product that we've been moving values throughout November. Those will get published tomorrow because we publish 3 days before the end of the month for our customers, 3 working days before the end of the month. So what we've seen during November is trade values dropping. We saw that in October. So we don't think it's down to, well, it's not just down to lockdown, it's down to the market having a bit of a realignment. Values are going to drop on average by 3% during November, which is quite a large amount in 1 month. They dropped by just over 2% in October, so a 5% drop in 2 months is quite an interesting amount that it's going to drop. And if you compare that to previous years, it does look quite considerable, but it's obviously off the back of lots of other things that have been happening this year. So it's quite a positive picture despite a negative movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's quite unusual, really, in this business, isn't it? When values drop, it's normally a negative story, isn't it? But because of this year, it's been so sort of unprecedented, really. It's quite a good thing, actually. It's a positive vibe.
Yeah, it's a bit of a realignment. I guess it's probably difficult to say that it's a good thing for the business, but for the industry. But it's certainly it could sort of stimulate the market a little bit. What we saw even before COVID was even mentioned, values were going up. They went up in January, they went up in February. There was a bit of a dip in March, obviously, when COVID was announced. We then had a lot of stability. We had no values moving for a couple of months when there was lockdown 1. We then had a very strong market in June, July, August, even September, where values either stayed level or went up in general. Certainly older cars in June went up considerably. And what you've got is a situation where cars are worth, at the same age and mileage point, they're worth more than the equivalent was at the start of this year and even at this point last year. So values were high. And what we've seen is a reluctance to pay those prices in the trade. And that's caused this realignment. But they're still, even with this 5% in 2 months, they're still ahead of where they were a year ago by around 3%. So you think about a £10,000 car being worth more by £300 than it was a year ago for the same type of vehicle that should have aged within its life cycle, then it's a very, very strong picture, even with this realignment.
Yeah. What kind of cars are falling the most at the moment? Which values have dropped the most in this particular time frame?
If you look at the overall picture, cars like city cars, they've probably gone down the most in percentage terms, but they're the ones that went up by the most in percentage terms. Super minis as well have dropped. We have seen some particular models. MPV overall has actually done okay for a bit of a unfashionable sector. It's actually done okay over the year, but we have seen some quite big drops recently. Cars like the Vauxhall Zafira, they've been quite heavily affected over the last month and aren't particularly popular at the moment, or there's a reluctance to pay those prices, basically. So there has been some drops in those sort of less desirable vehicles. On the other side to that, we've actually seen some increases for something like a Toyota Land Cruiser. There's not many of them out in the market, and those have actually gone up by over £1,000 over the last month. So it's really, really mixed out there. I'd describe it as volatile, but it is also very mixed. And one of the things we haven't done is we haven't followed where individual vendors have sold some very cheap cars. We haven't followed that. We've tried to trade the whole market with what's been going on. So the drops where we have made them and the increases are from a variety of sources of data. So not just from the auctions, but from other sources as well. But it's been quite interesting that premium cars haven't been quite so heavily affected. Maybe that's a signal for the economy that it is maybe the lower earners that are more affected by the pandemic, with job losses and things like that, whereas people who have got money to spend have still got money to spend.
Even through this volatility, are we still seeing some seasonal trends? You know, we're moving into winter across the board. Are things like 4x4s and SUVs going up, or have they just been high, you know, throughout the year?
It's kind of the perfect storm, really, because you've got Q4, which is the weakest quarter of the year. You've got high previous prices, and then you've got a reluctance for the trade to pay those high prices because they're a little bit worried about what's going to happen with people's economic situation. As you go into Christmas anyway, it tends to drop away. Demand tends to drop away, people focusing on Christmas rather than making a big ticket purchase. You tend to get less seasonality with things like SUVs now anyway, because they're more of a lifestyle choice than a seasonal purchase. But you get seasonality in the final quarter of the year. That's when values tend to soften, and that's what we're seeing. So we're putting this down to seasonality and the fact that values were high previously, and a little bit of the economic situation as well as to why values have dropped. But I'm sure you're going to ask me what happens next, which is a very difficult one to answer. But we do think it's quite a positive sign for the next few weeks.
Yeah, bit of a difficult question to answer, this one, but you know, in a lot of sectors, there's been a reaction to news of vaccines and things starting to get back to normal, perhaps Easter time next year. Have we been seeing that in the used car sector? And if things do get back to normal at Easter time next year, could the used car market get back to sort of conventional norms by then? What do you think?
There's been a little bit of a reaction over the last week or so where we've seen a little bit of stabilising of conversion rates, but I'm not sure that's down to the vaccine. Obviously, that's portrayed a bit of a positive picture, but every time you switch on the news, there seems to be a different story with that, whether it's going to be April, then you're saying it's going to be June. So there's lots of sort of moving parts to that, and I'm sure there'll be a few bumps in the road between now and then. So there's been a little bit of a stabilisation, but I think that's more that the trade are potentially buying for December, pent up demand potentially, and also for a strong January, hoping for a strong January. So I think it's more down to that. Whether we'll ever get back to some sort of normality in the used car market, if you look back at previous years, I'm not sure there is a normal really. We've seen values dropping, we've seen values increasing. Even in 2018, values went up when there was obviously no issues like now. So I think the used car market is really, really robust. People will always want to buy used cars. With things like the 2030 ICE ban coming up, people will still want to buy used petrol and diesel cars, even running up to that. So all of these sort of, as I say, bumps in the road that happen, the used car market will remain strong. Prices may come down. That's a kind of a fact of life as vehicles age, but they will still be in demand.
Yeah. Just for dealers who may be tuning in and they just want a quick snippet, can you just give us just a couple of sentences on exactly what you're seeing, just the overall picture? Because we've gone into some lovely detail there, but what's the headline? What's the headline for you?
So the headline really is a 3% drop at the 3-year 60,000 mile point on average. Obviously, lots of different things will move within that by different amounts, but that's the average drop. So it's 5% over a couple of months. It does seem to have stabilised a little bit recently over the last few days when we're seeing the data. So I think we go into December with quite positive, some pent up demand, as I say. We think that values may drop again slightly in December, but not by as much as they've done. So yeah, that would be my sort of view of the very short term.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're going to have to leave it there today, I'm afraid, Darren. But as ever, thank you so much. You know, wise words, and it's just it's great to just get an update on the used car market there. So thanks very much indeed, Darren, for joining us.
Okay, pleasure.
If you'd like to be involved in a car dealer live just like this one, then please do email me, james.batchelor@blackbullmedia.co.uk. But for today, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.